Welcome to Practical Christian Lessons, and today we are going to be talking about the priesthood of the Old Testament and those around them. Let's get into it. So, welcome to Practical Christian Lessons. I'm Josh for Pearsall, and if you've been following the channel, yes, I have shaved. Watch our video on Monday for a bit of a detailed explanation as to why. Or Tuesday night. I'm sorry, not Monday. Tuesday night. Go watch that video. It's on Divine Melchizedek. It's great. Anyway, so you should watch it anyway. We are going to be reading the essay, The Installation of Priests at Emar and in Israel. This is on page 138 of the Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. If you want to get this, it's out of print, so it will be a bit pricey. We are going to be skipping over an essay on the Urim and the Thummim. I do have some thoughts about pointing out how it's different from, say, divination and the condemned practice of divination, but they don't go into that in the essay, so I was just going to not delve into that for anyone wondering they are different. If you want to hear about that, and you do want me to read that essay and make a video on that, put stuff in the comments. You guys can push me to do things. You're not my bosses, but I will take your opinions into consideration. I'm making content for people to enjoy and to learn from, so I want people to be learning and enjoying, and I will take your if you're going to take the time to watch these videos, I will take your opinion into consideration. So this is over Exodus 29. Cuneiform tablets dating to the 14th through 13th centuries BC detail the rituals for installing the storm god's high priestess in Amar, a Bronze Age city in Syria. When a former high priestess died, the daughter of a local family was chosen by lot to replace her. This young woman was anointed with sacred oil, and on the next day followed festive singers and sacrificial animals to the storm god's temple. At the entrance to the temple courtyard, her head was shaved, and all of the city's numerous gods reconsecrated. Following her actual installation on the third day, the newly initiated high priestess participated in a ritual procession to sacred sites throughout Amar, receiving in the process gold jewelry, a sacred headdress, aromatics, and an abundance of food items. Storm god-related sacrifices and feast continued for a total of 7 days, culminating in the presentation of the high priestess as a bride to the storm god. In a similar way, new priests of Israel were anointed with oil and received sacred garments to wear, accompanied by multiple sacrifices. The consecration ceremony for each new Israelite priest and the altar also took place during a 7-day period. Significant differences nevertheless existed between the two cultures' priestly installation rituals. Whereas the storm god's newly installed high priestess was shaved at the temple entrance, the novice biblical priests were ceremonially washed at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and many were told not to shave. And unlike the Emar rituals, the biblical installation expressly forbade any recognition of other deities. The most notable difference between the two traditions, however, was the hereditary nature of the biblical priesthood. Rather than selecting successive priests by lot, the God of Israel personally designated that Aaron and his male descendants were to represent him perpetually as his priest. Although ancient Israel in many ways shared with surrounding nations a common cultural milieu, its unique priestly rites and laws marked the Israelites as a distinctive, special people, the chosen covenantal people of the Creator God. And there's also some discussion when looking at Leviticus. I don't actually know if the essays will get into this. There are some who comment that it seems the regular people of Israel as well, right? The Lord Adonai calls the entire nation to be a priesthood of believers, to be a nation of priests to the world. And some people look at the Levitical laws and say that they indicate the regular people were also participating in actually performing the sacrifices. Not every step of it, clearly, but some parts of it. Not going to get into this video. Hopefully they'll get into that in this. If not, we might have to do a video trying to dig into that at some point. But, there are other differences they didn't note here, right? Like the priestess is described as the bride of the false pagan deity of their neighbors. And, right, when you look at Israel, when it comes to that type of relationship, that's described of the Lord and his people, not, sort of the more polygamous thoughts, right, where the pagan deities would have multiple brides. Of course, they'd have their own Baal and Asherah, and then these priestesses, lots of other stuff there. And of course, right, they're going around getting all these super fancy things, and the priest it notes this in the Urim Thummim, they have a breastplate, they have breastpiece for the priesthood. They do have 12 gems embedded into it, things like that. But it's not quite the same as like marching around to all these places and getting these things. They're doing it in one central location. There are quite a few very notable differences. And that was one of the key marks in how Israel was to be distinct, was in the way it was a priesthood. That's highlighted not just in Exodus and when they're told to be a nation that's a priesthood. When it goes through the ceremony for someone becoming a priest, it is extremely detailed. And you can, if you really want to, I suspect most people won't want to do this, but if you really want to, you can sit down and read the priesthood initiation in the Old Testament laws, and then go read some of the others around them. If that's your cup of tea, I applaud you. That is not my particular cup of tea. I will do that doing textual analysis and stuff like that, comparing different texts that are like manuscripts. But for some reason, I can't get into doing that. But the priesthood is a really distinct mark of Israel, right? For one, they don't have priestesses. That's a very notable mark. Most of the cultures around them had priestesses, and plenty had priests as well. But priestess was super common, right? You had a lot of mentions of the templehood prostitutes as well, which were viewed as a sort of priest. And we can get into that in this video. One of the ancient cultic thoughts from the pagans was, right, one of the things you'd want from the deities is rain to bring forth the harvest. Well, for them, the rain comes from Baal, Asherah is earth, and they want the crops. Well, the rain that comes from Baal is a specific product that comes from him, and the beasts that grow from the fields, the harvest, everything that comes up from the earth, are the offspring of Asherah and Baal. Put those two pieces together. There's a reason the Asherah poles were long and tall. So one of the roles of the temple prostitutes was when people would go visit them, they wanted to get Baal and Asherah to reproduce so they could have crops, they could have livestock, they could have blessing. One of the ways they thought they were doing that was by performing the act in the temple so that Baal and Asherah would watch and then do the act themselves. So clearly that's a very different type of ritual worship that was going on there than what was instituted by the Lord with Israel. Of course, all throughout the Old Testament, you have syncretism going on, you have idolatry going on. People of Israel do engage in these practices. They do get punished for it. You read the prophets and their lamentations about this and their constant cries against this. This is one of the key features of Israel's shortcoming in the Old Testament, is falling into these types of practices. And again, that's also one of the reasons they probably fell into it as often as they did, is because they wanted to engage in those things, and it came, when they looked around at their neighbors and saw them having their blessings of crops, even though the Lord was already blessing their people, they would be like, oh, why can't we have both those things? It's a sad reality, but it is what happened. So, very, very distinct priesthood in the nation of Israel, right? And for anyone who hasn't been following along these series, the point of this series is to go through using this Bible, but we could use other resources, and going through this study Bible and its essays, and showing how the Old Testament theology and way in which they operated is so distinct from their neighbors, it can't have just been an evolution of theology or thought or practice from their neighbors. Which, that view, what I just mentioned, was the standard view of biblical scholarship up until about 60, 80 years ago. I think it's about 80 years ago now. And what changed wasn't any evidence. It was just the mindset of the people doing the scholarship. It was specifically the mindset of the mind. It was the thought of the skeptical scholarship, and they changed their philosophy. Instead of looking at how different they were and noticing that there's no way that this was just an evolution of thought, they focused on their similarities. The reason Israel has one God is no longer so markedly different than their neighbors around them, because the other neighbors had a pantheon but had one prime deity. All Israel did was remove the other deities. That's not what happened. But that's what some of these hyper-skeptical critical scholars try to delve into. And some forms of critical scholarship I'm perfectly fine with. But many forms, they're too critical. They're too skeptical, where they'll go to things like this that are just nonsense. If you look at the evidence, that makes no sense. That is such an illogical conclusion. Whether or not you agree with the Bible, whether or not you believe it's true, to say it's just an evolution out of that Old Testament thought is insane. It makes no sense when you sit down and compare the differences. They are too different to just be an evolution of the same thought. They are so radically different. And before I get off on a tangent there, I'm going to stop there. If you want to know more about that, catch up on our series. It's on the channel. Many of the videos will be titled, have part of the same title. Why the Bible, not the Baal cycle. Baal is one of the Old Testament pagan deities, one of the demons of the Old Testament that many of the nations worshipped. I believe the playlist, if you want to just find them all in one playlist, is the Bible's history. I think is what I titled it. And if you're kind of wondering, if you want a good book on this series, I think I actually put that in the closet as well. I did. Is John Oswalt, The Bible Among the Myths. And you can find a used copy. I got mine for, I think, $6 online. It was one of my textbooks for this past semester that I took. Wonderful book, and it goes through a lot of these and more, and addresses the scholarship, addresses these problems in depth. I recommend going through that book. It's a wonderful book. You might not agree with everything he says, but he does a very good job of laying out his premise and then executing it and showing you the evidence to back it up. So check that book out. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.